Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent show for you today, so please, if you could, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to Tochnyi. We have an excellent broadcast for you today. First, I will be providing the news report, as I usually do. That will be followed by Mr. Germany to Ukraine's report. And then we'll maybe just cover some extra news that didn't make it into the main segment and do some Q&A. So that's the plan for today. Hope everyone's ready. Sit, have a seat, and enjoy. We'll get right to the news. These are the main headlines as of April 27th, 2025. First up, we have operations. On the night of April 18th, Yevgeny Rydakov, a Russian engineer working on the modernization of electronic warfare systems deployed against Ukraine, lost his life in an explosion in the Russian city of Bryansk, located near the border. Reports from both Ukraine and Russian media surfaced on April 25th describing the incident. According to sources cited by RBC Ukraine, Rydakov and a colleague entered a vehicle that subsequently exploded. Rydakov led the design bureau at the Bryansk electromechanical plant and was tasked with enhancing the Krasuka electronic warfare system, which Russia employs to disrupt drones and airborne threats. It was reported that the colleague accompanying him, likely his deputy or assistants, also perished in the explosion. The Russian Telegram channel MASH claimed that the blast was caused by an improvised device laden with shrapnel attached to the underside of the vehicle. At the time of reporting, no party has taken official responsibility for the attack. The Kyiv Independent noted that it could not independently verify the information and that Ukraine's military intelligence agency stated it was unable to confirm or deny details surrounding the event. Also this week, media reports indicated that the individual suspected of carrying out the operation against General Yaroslav Moskalik lived in the same apartment building. The suspect reportedly parked a car rigged with both explosives and a surveillance device outside the entrance on April 16th. Residents recalled seeing a Volkswagen Golf stationed near the building around that time, with a man matching the description of the suspect observed lingering nearby before disappearing. Further accounts suggested that the suspect departed Russia for Turkey on April 19th, just a few days after positioning the vehicle. The suspect was identified as Nat Kuzin, originally from Sumy, Ukraine, who had officially been residing in Russia's Karachi-Cherkassia region since 2015. In reaction to the incident, Russia's foreign ministry stated that there were grounds to suspect the involvement of Ukrainian special services. Images published by Russian media showed the wreckage of a Volkswagen Golf following the explosion in Balashikha on April 25th. The incident occurred less than 2 weeks after Russian forces conducted a missile strike on the city center of Sumy, Ukraine, resulting in the tragic loss of 35 civilians, including 2 children, and injuring 127 others. Ukraine's intelligence directorate has publicly blamed Russian personnel from the 112th and 448th Missile Brigades for that attack, which they labeled as an act of mass violence against civilians. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the situation regarding a proposed ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, emphasizing that Ukraine would respond to Russian actions in kind. In a message shared via Telegram, Zelenskyy stated that if Russia decided to genuinely observe a full-scale ceasefire, Ukraine would match that posture. He noted that if true calm prevailed, Ukraine would even support extending it beyond Easter, aiming for a longer-lasting pause that could open the door to genuine progress towards peace. However, he expressed skepticism and pointed out that short-term gestures are easy to stage for public relations, but true trust-building requires sustained commitments over a longer period. According to Zelenskyy, reports from Ukraine's military leadership confirm that Russian forces continue aggressive maneuvers across parts of the front line, with artillery bombardment still ongoing. Due to these actions, Ukraine remains wary of trusting any declarations from Moscow, viewing them as potentially deceptive based on past experience. He reiterated that Ukrainian forces will continue to respond thoughtfully and proportionally to any hostile activity and ensured that every provocation would receive an appropriate answer. And of course, that so-called ceasefire, if it could in fact be called that, has now concluded. Up next, we have economy and aid. Japan's Kyushu University Institute for the Kyushu Pioneers of Space, or IQPS, has reached an agreement to supply Ukraine's military intelligence agency with synthetic aperture radar imaging, according to reports by Intelligence Online published on April 21st. Discussions between Japanese and Ukrainian officials reportedly began in February and became more urgent after the United States temporarily suspended intelligence sharing with Kyiv in early March. IQPS, which is planning to launch its 7th SAR satellite by the end of 2026, committed to a timeline of 2 to 3 months to integrate the necessary software into Ukraine's intelligence platforms, the magazine reported. SAR imaging technology allows for the creation of detailed 2- and 3-dimensional representations of terrain and infrastructure and is valued in military operations for its ability to function effectively in all weather conditions. Such capabilities are especially useful for monitoring enemy positions and movements. The interruption by the U.S. previously has raised serious concerns about potential future disruptions and caused Ukraine to look for alternatives. The World Bank has committed $70 million to assist Ukraine in ensuring the continued stability of energy infrastructure. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced the development on Facebook, as reported by Ukrinform. He announced that the agreement was finalized in Washington during a meeting with Anna Bierde, the World Bank's managing director of operations. According to Shmyhal, the funding will be directed to Ukraine's state-owned hydroelectric company, Ukrhydroenergo. The company will use the resources to acquire energy storage systems, which will help build reserves of electricity and bolster the country's overall energy security. Shmyhal expressed gratitude to the World Bank and other international partners for their ongoing support and emphasized that Ukraine's energy sector has sustained extensive damage as a result of Russian strikes targeting critical infrastructure. During the previous winter, Russian strikes targeted 34 facilities belonging to Ukraine's largest gas producer, Ukrgaz-Vidobuvayna, which resulted in nearly half of the company's gas production being disrupted. The impact was particularly severe in cities like Kryvyi Rih, Mykolaiv, and Kherson, where the damage to the gas network and ongoing assaults threatened to leave over 1 million residents without essential energy services, according to the company's statement. In response, emergency teams have worked continuously to stabilize the situation, and the company secured more than 5 billion hryvnia in humanitarian assistance to prevent the energy systems from collapsing. To mitigate the damage and prepare for future needs, Naftogaz has imported 800 million cubic meters of gas and begun extensive repairs to its own infrastructure. These efforts are intended to strengthen the network ahead of the 2024-2025 autumn and winter seasons and to make up for previous losses. By March, Ukraine had reported that it had successfully restored more than half of the gas production volumes disrupted by the attacks. Roman Chumak, the interim CEO, stated that preparations for the upcoming winter were already underway and that since the beginning of 2025, Naftogaz has secured contracts for 1.5 billion cubic meters of gas, including 400 million cubic meters specifically allocated for the winter season. Ukrainian production of the Bodana self-propelled artillery system has now reached a monthly output of up to 36 units, according to a report from Army Technology citing its own sources. While the Defense Procurement Agency officially stated that production was exceeding 20 units per month, Army Technology's separate source indicated that deliveries had already climbed as high as 36 systems within that time frame. And to put that into context, that would make it one of, if not the most mass-produced motorized artillery systems on the planet. Probably screwed up the terminology there, but just letting you guys know that. Serial manufacturing of the Bodana artillery system began in early 2023, and since then, at least 5 different variants have been developed, distinguished by various chassis and cabin designs. By May 2024, Ukraine announced it was producing as many as 10 units monthly, a figure that the president later updated to 20 units per month. By March, representatives of the manufacturer confirmed to the media that production had surpassed 20 units monthly. To safeguard the manufacturing process, production facilities have been dispersed across multiple locations, including sites abroad. Components are duplicated across different locations to ensure that no single strike could halt overall production. The cost of each Bodana system ranges between 2.3 and 2.8 million euros, with the price influenced by specific chassis configurations. As of early 2025, more than 85% of the parts for the system are produced domestically in Ukraine, and efforts are underway to raise this to 95% by the end of the year. Field reports from Ukrainian artillery crews have generally been positive, praising the Bodana for its high firing precision and durability. Crews report being able to fire between 7,000 and 8,000 rounds without a significant loss of accuracy, and noted that its precision surpasses that of some Western systems. However, reliability issues with certain components, including the afterburner, are still being addressed. The Bodana artillery system has already been incorporated into at least 18 brigades across Ukraine's defense forces, spanning the Army, Marines, National Guard, a special consolidated brigade of the National Police, and even special forces under the Defense Intelligence Directorate. The Security Service of Ukraine reported the detention and seizure of a foreign vessel accused in aiding Russia in the unlawful removal of Ukrainian agricultural goods from regions under temporary occupation. According to a statement from the SSU's press office, as relayed by an Ukrinform correspondent, the operation was conducted jointly by the SSU and the State Border Guard Service within Ukraine's Black Sea internal waters. Investigators determined that the vessel in question belonged to a clandestine fleet utilized by Russia to transport Ukrainian grain to third-party countries without authorization. Evidence revealed that in late 2024, the ship had departed from the occupied port of Sevastopol, carrying 5,000 tons of wheat carried from southern Ukrainian territories under Russian control. In an effort to conceal the operation, the ship sailed under the flag of an Asian nation. During the search of the vessel, officials uncovered documents, navigation tools, and other tangible proof that directly linked the ship to the unlawful transport of Ukrainian agricultural products. Following the vessel's seizure and the detention of its crew, authorities began further investigative measures to uncover the full extent of the violations and to pursue accountability for those involved. Ukraine's real gross domestic product grew by 1.1% during the first quarter of 2025, according to the monthly economic monitoring report released by the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. The IER clarified its estimates based on data published by the State Statistics Service, which includes figures from sectors such as industry and construction. Their breakdown showed GDP rising by 1.2% in January and 0.7% in February. Improvements in electricity availability and a gradual uptick in demand were cited as the main factors contributing to stronger economic performance in March over February. The IER estimated that real GDP grew by 1.3% during that month. However, not all sectors experienced growth. Agricultural value fell by approximately 3%, and there's a continued decline in household livestock production. Industry fared better, with real gross value added growing by 2.5% over last year. In contrast, extractive industries reported a contraction of over 3%. This is attributed to the temporary loss of several coal mining sites in the Donetsk region and the continued strikes on gas production facilities. Transportation also showed difficulties, with real GVA in March estimated to have fallen by around 6%, consistent with February's revised figures. The slowdown in railway freight, exacerbated by cyber attacks, outweighed modest gains in other areas of the transport sector. Additionally, the effects of the suspended gas transit routes continue to weigh on the broader transportation industry. On April 24th, the Ukrainian government announced that it had been unable to reach a deal with its creditors to restructure approximately $2.6 billion in outstanding obligations. As a result, Ukraine now faces the possibility of missing a $600 million payment that comes due in late May, which would raise concerns about a potential financial default. According to an official statement issued after a series of negotiations held in Washington from April 15th to the 23rd, Ukraine rejected the latest proposal from a group of restricted holders and indicated that it would not offer an alternative before the end of the agreed restricted period. Despite this breakdown in talks, Kyiv emphasized its intention to maintain a dialogue with creditors and to explore alternative pathways to address the restructuring challenge. The disputed $2.6 billion relates specifically to GDP warrants, a type of financial instrument that entitles investors to additional payments based on Ukraine's economic performance. Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko noted that these warrants were conceived under very different circumstances and argued that Ukraine's recent modest economic growth should not be interpreted as a robust recovery, but rather as a fragile bounce back from a near 30% collapse triggered by the full-scale invasion. Marchenko stressed that warrants should not be allowed to impede Ukraine's broader economic recovery and expressed Kyiv's goal of achieving a fair and comprehensive solution. These GDP warrants had not been included in Ukraine's earlier restructuring agreement that it concluded in July of 2024, which addressed around $20 billion of national debt and allowed the country to avoid financial collapse while continuing to fund its defense efforts. However, the unresolved status of the warrants now poses new risks to the Ukrainian financial system. The International Monetary Fund has cautioned that a failure to resolve the dispute could jeopardize Ukraine's ability to secure future debt restructuring agreements and could also endanger its $15.6 billion extended fund facility program. Russian authorities are preparing for a continued decline in oil prices, with the Economic Development Ministry significantly lowering its forecast for 2025. They now expect Urals crude to average around $56 per barrel, which would be the lowest since the pandemic-driven collapse in 2020. This new estimate is well below the price planned for Russia's federal budget, meaning that the government would likely face a serious financial strain. Under Russia's budget rules, when oil prices are strong, extra revenues are saved in the National Wealth Fund. But when prices drop below a certain level, the government has to pull from those savings to cover the gap. With a current sharp fall in global oil prices, revenue from oil and gas in Russia's budget dropped by 10% in the first quarter of 2025 compared to the year before, with an even steeper decline in March. Experts state that even a small drop in the oil price could cost Russia billions in lost income each year. If prices stay this low, analysts predict that Russia could face a shortfall close to 1 trillion rubles. The overall budget deficit for 2025 could end up significantly higher than planned. Some of the missing funds might be covered by increased income from other sources, helped along by inflation and modest economic growth. Officials have raised their inflation forecast but kept their economic growth expectations steady for now, citing a relatively strong start to the year. Despite this, the financial pressure remains high. Analysts state that Russia's reserve funds are already being heavily used, and flexibility is limited due to the government's priority on defense spending. Although officials insist the deficit will stay manageable, early figures suggest it's already larger than anticipated. And looking ahead, Russian authorities expect only a small to modest recovery in oil prices over the next few years. Two Russian companies, Unpack and the Don Coal Trading House, which had leased 15 coal mines in Ukraine's occupied Luhansk and Donetsk regions, have decided to abandon 9 of them. According to a report by RBC, the companies concluded that the high operating expenses combined with low global coal prices make continued operations financially unfeasible. The future of the abandoned sites is now under debate between Russian state officials and private investors who had acquired property rights when Moscow began selling off the mines last year. Disagreements center around who will be responsible for the costly process of drafting closure plans for the non-viable mines and covering the expenses needed to maintain them until they are formally decommissioned or mothballed. RBC estimates that the total yearly maintenance cost for the affected mines could be around 2 to 3 billion rubles, or around $30 million. Ukrainian authorities estimate that between 2014 and 2022, Moscow's proxy administrations in Luhansk and Donetsk sent around 2.8 million tons of coal per year into Russia, generating around $288 million annually. Prior to Russia's intervention in the region, there were reportedly 95 functioning coal mines. However, how many remain operational today is not clear. The Donetsk coal basin, one of the largest in the world, has been targeted by Russian authorities for restructuring. In 2023, Moscow drafted a plan to revitalize the local coal sector by attracting new private investment, and by 2024, leases for the mines had begun to be issued to the private investors. And finally, we have a lot of developments this week in international relations. So first, to set the stage a little bit, this week saw notable diplomatic movement as efforts to outline a framework for ending the Russian invasion in Ukraine continued, although major disputes remain between Washington and Kyiv. According to CNN, which cited a source familiar with the discussions, the primary points of contention involve security guarantees for Ukraine and the American stance on Russia's control over Crimea. Ukraine is seeking security commitments not just from European countries, but also directly from the United States, while the American draft emphasized Europe as the main provider of such guarantees. Another major divide is the U.S. proposal that would tacitly accept Russian control over Crimea, a position Ukraine finds entirely unacceptable. Ukraine also insists that the issue of Russian-held territories captured after 2022 must be resolved following the ceasefire. In response to the initial American framework, Ukraine, together with France, the UK, and Germany, submitted a counterproposal. This new proposal, presented to U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg, calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire by both sides as a prerequisite for any further steps. Despite these differences, Ukraine has agreed to several parts of the U.S. plan. Ukrainian officials reportedly accepted that sanctions placed on Russia since 2014 could be gradually lifted following the implementation of a peace plan. They also agreed not to pursue NATO membership, to freeze the current battle lines, and to regain control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant area. Ukrainian sources emphasize their willingness to discuss territorial issues, and this marks a major shift in their position, but express concern that if President Trump does not view this as a major concession by Ukraine, it could complicate the negotiations further. According to reporting by European Pravda, citing the New York Post, discussions are underway around forming a joint commission as part of U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed peace plan. This commission would include representatives from Ukraine, Russia, and a non-NATO country, and would be tasked with monitoring compliance with a potential ceasefire agreement. Although many aspects of the peace plan are still being finalized, a senior official from the Trump administration mentioned that one idea being considered is the deployment of European forces into Ukraine if a ceasefire is achieved. These troops would form what is being called a resiliency force, which would contribute to the security guarantees that Ukraine has been seeking. While the U.S. itself may not send troops to the country, it could participate by providing financial support alongside a third-party nation. In addition to the resiliency force, there would be a separate mission focused purely on overseeing the ceasefire. This body, made up of Russians, Ukrainians, and representatives from a non-NATO country, would monitor the front lines and ensure both sides adhere to the ceasefire terms. The New York Post noted that it could not independently verify all the new claims surrounding the plan. However, it cited statements from senior U.S. officials largely corroborating these accounts and indicating that the most sensitive point for Ukraine in recent talks has been related to territorial issues. This week in the UK, The Telegraph reported that the US has been privately offering to provide security guarantees for this coalition of the willing initiative led by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. According to the report, US officials have indicated a willingness to support a European military presence in Ukraine through intelligence sharing and logistical assistance, following the conclusion of a peace agreement. Downing Street reportedly views this American offer as a major breakthrough after they had been pressuring the US for such a guarantee over the past 2 months. The proposed support would involve helping European forces operating by land, air, and sea to uphold the terms of a future peace deal. While Trump has avoided making public commitments on the matter, behind closed doors, U.S. negotiators have suggested that the U.S. would back a Western force, although the question of direct intervention in the event of an attack remains unresolved. In an interview with The Telegraph, Starmer emphasized the importance of securing American backing for the plan, noting that Trump had privately reassured him multiple times that U.S. support would be available. Trump also recently stated that a peace deal was, quote, pretty close following direct talks between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to Sky News, the foreign ministers of the UK, France, Germany, and Ukraine have postponed a high-level peace meeting that was originally set to take place in London on April 23rd. For now, discussions will continue, but only at the level of senior officials rather than involving the top diplomats. The UK Foreign Office, as quoted by The Guardian, confirmed that the talks would still happen, but behind closed doors and with a reduced format. Despite the change, Andriy Yermak, the head of the Ukrainian president's office, confirmed that Ukraine's delegation had arrived in London, accompanied by the defense minister and foreign minister. The decision to postpone the ministerial gathering came after the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio withdrew from the meeting, citing logistical challenges relating to his schedule. Following the withdrawal, France and Germany reportedly halted preparations for their ministers to attend. While higher-level talks have been put on hold for now, there does remain the possibility that a ministerial meeting will be organized at a future date. This week's diplomatic efforts culminated with a significant, although brief, meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the Vatican, held quietly on the sidelines of Pope Francis's funeral. They marked their first encounter since a tense Oval Office meeting months earlier. Zelenskyy described the Vatican meeting as a meaningful and symbolic moment and expressed hope that it could lead to lasting results, particularly regarding an unconditional ceasefire. Images shared by the Ukrainian presidency captured the two leaders engaged in an intense discussion near the altar where the Pope's simple coffin was displayed. Zelenskyy later wrote that they spoke extensively about protecting lives, achieving a full ceasefire, and securing a stable peace that would prevent future conflict. Ukrainian aides characterized the discussion as constructive, while the White House called it highly productive. Although the meeting drew considerable international attention, Trump departed Rome as planned immediately after the funeral without any additional talks scheduled. However, he and Zelenskyy briefly joined British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron inside the Basilica for an informal discussion. Macron later described the exchange as positive and also met with Zelenskyy separately. While in Rome, Trump claimed that progress had been made and urged both sides to hold direct high-level talks to finalize an agreement, stating that most of the key points were already settled. Frustration on Trump's side is reportedly growing, with the U.S. president warning that he might abandon peace efforts altogether if more tangible movement towards a ceasefire is not achieved soon. And last item for this week, according to The Times, the United Kingdom is reconsidering earlier plans to deploy thousands of troops to Ukraine due to concerns that such a move would carry too much risk. Gee, if they had only gone to Tochnyi.info back in February when my colleague Erlend had written an article that outlined exactly all of the problems they were describing, maybe they wouldn't have had to make all those public promises. Anyway, instead, the approach to military support is shifting, with British and French instructors likely to be sent to the western parts of Ukraine, far from the front lines. These instructors would not be stationed near strategic targets, nor directly involved in protecting Ukrainian forces. This revised plan still aligns with maintaining a military presence in Ukraine, but limits exposure to high-risk areas. Air cover would be provided to the instructors by Western aircraft, ensuring some level of security from the skies. Turkey is expected to take on an important role on the naval side of the operation, which is still being finalized. Weapons deliveries from the UK and European allies will continue, ensuring that Ukraine remains well armed if Russia fails to respect any future peace agreements. Although final decisions have yet to be made, the British Ministry of Defense has made it clear that the option of sending troops in some form remains on the table for consideration. Diplomatic discussions within the Coalition of the Willing previously floated the idea of deploying tens of thousands of ground forces, but concerns over the scale of the task and the risks have led to a rethink. Some Ukrainian officials, however, are concerned that foreign training personnel could be quickly pulled out again if conditions worsen, similar to the withdrawal of British forces just before the full-scale invasion in 2022. A diplomatic source involved in the talks told The Times that the shift in the UK's position is intended to pressure Moscow into adjusting its own so-called red lines, with the aim of moving closer to a peace settlement. And that wraps up the main headlines for this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that would be me. Damn, Joseph, what a roast. Yeah, hello guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. On Thursday, with extensive financial assistance from the German government, a new nephrology and dialysis department has been opened in the Ochmadut Children's Hospital in Kyiv. I'm very sorry if I butchered that name, which was badly damaged last year due to a Russian terrorist attack. This was announced by the Ministry of Health of Ukraine. In addition to dozens of medical devices and furniture for launches, treatment rooms, and more, 2 water treatment systems, a fire protection system, ventilation and air conditioning systems, a medical lift for transporting patients in beds, the renovation of a surgery room, and a powerful photovoltaic system to protect the department from power outages were also financed by Germany. A brief look back, shortly after the Russian attack on the Children's Hospital, the German government provided a total of 14 million euros, 4 million for emergency funds and 10 million for the reconstruction. And already my last bit of this week, very quiet week, I reported on Friday that the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine have begun preparations for implementing SAP Defense and Security, the automated defense resource management system used by 28 NATO armies. The project gets financed completely by the US as well as Germany. The updated processes will be implemented by an international team that includes German and Ukrainian SAP specialists, experts from Ukrainian defense agencies, and representatives, damn, what's happening today, of an international implementation partner. In addition to the funding provided by Germany and the US, specialists from the armed forces of Germany, Canada, the Netherlands, Poland, and the US are also providing counseling support for the project, which is intended to be completed by 2027. And yeah, that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
So I guess we're gonna move on. I think Joseph you have some extra bits.
I do, Erlend. The bits that didn't make it into the news presentation this week, just some general stuff. So I'll start with, I guess, like the simplest one. Sorry, I put them out of order, Erlend. There were some energy talks between the Ukrainian and US ministers of energy. Normally I wouldn't comment on just some like low-level talks between some energy people. That happens between European countries and Ukraine all the time. But for the US, it's kind of significant because as far as I know, it's the first like major discussion that we've seen between the US and Ukraine about protecting Ukraine's energy infrastructure since the Trump administration came into office. Basically, there were programs in place to have the US support Ukrainian protection and rebuilding of energy infrastructure that were sort of like cut and withdrawn as part of USAID stuff. And since then, we haven't really seen any like movement on that issue. So obviously not like a huge deal to have low-level talks between ministers, but just to see a little movement like that is, I guess, a little bit encouraging. So yeah, we'll just take that good news for what it is. Then the next item, I guess, would be more in order, which is Moscow Times released an article this week, which I think is reasonably logical or makes sense to me. Obviously, we're engaging into Kremlinology here, trying to look into the cloudy crystal ball that is the Russian political elite and, of course, the guy at the top. But I think it's a reasonably, I don't know, like insightful take on what's going on. And it reflects what my understanding of like Russian foreign policy goals have been for a long time in Russian discourse. And that is, the Russians have talked for decades at this point, basically since September 11th, about what they call like a new Yalta, which is like the idea that the U.S. will come sit down with them again, like at Yalta, and sort of divide up, Europe. That's something that Putin has, I would say, actively pursued. He's never used the term New Yalta, but that's something that the Russian elite use to talk about this idea. And I would say historically, Putin has attempted to pursue that strategy, or at least in their words, he's done so by effectively distracting the U.S. or causing problems for the U.S. And the sort of approach has been stick their nose in a bunch of U.S. business, for example, like Syria, and just cause as many problems as possible. And basically tell the U.S. we know you need to focus on China. If you make a deal with us, we'll stop bothering you, right? That's kind of been their strategy for a long time. I would say that their leverage has decreased in recent times, so their approach has shifted a little bit, but the fundamental strategy seems to be the same. And it's been tailored a little bit specifically more towards Trump, which is this idea of a more basically a larger discussion about a larger deal. So that kind of leads into the article that was released this week. And it's basically what is their strategy dealing with Trump right now? What is this Witkoff guy talking to Trump about in all these stupid meetings, right? So Moscow's preparing for these larger negotiations, mainly between Putin and Trump directly. And what's on their mind seems to be something larger than Ukraine. And it's not clear how much of that is actually their real strategy. They really want something bigger than Ukraine from the US, versus they're doing that in order to make Ukraine seem like a smaller issue for the US, right? Oh, so you just concede a few points on Ukraine and then we'll make this bigger deal with you, right? Something like that. So that seems to be, I think, what this article is saying that they're trying to do. So to entice, the Trump administration and the U.S., they're offering incentives focused on rare earths, energy cooperation, things like Putin's visiting Washington, reviving the Trump Tower Moscow project, various corporate deals between, Russian and U.S. companies, right? Things that they see as things that Trump would like. And it's described in the article as quick, flashy, media-friendly achievements that can be completed within a single presidential term. So offering him very short-term but broad things that he would like personally. And then Ukraine's viewed as Russia's main bargaining chip. They hope to use the possibility of a ceasefire to extract concessions. And they think that maybe they can use this broader deal as part of a way to get some concessions from the U.S. on Ukraine, particularly limiting U.S. military aid in the future. And then the article kind of concludes, which I think is accurate, that despite this strategy and despite their efforts, their real leverage to offer the U.S. a deal is quite limited. Their trade with the U.S. is and always has been minimal. We're sort of competitors in a lot of areas more than trade partners. Influence over areas where once they had a little bit more influence, I think they've lost influence. Those main areas are in Syria, right? They had a lot more influence before. And also because of Syria, also with Iran, they had some more influence that they lost as a result. They've lost considerable leverage with Iran since the full-scale invasion started. And also North Korea, right? North Korea's gained a lot of leverage on them. So historically, Russia's been able to put leverage on those guys and get more concessions out of the U.S. But now their ability to do that is more limited because their leverage, the equation has been changing. North Korea and Iran have been helping them. So who are they to go to them now and ask for favors, right? So that's the issue for Russia. They don't really have much to offer the U.S. Ultimately, their plan hinges on keeping Trump engaged personally and offering him these high-profile, low-effort victories and trying to kind of rebuild his trust and patience and relations with the Trump administration personally. It's not a good long-term plan, but it might work kind of in the shorter medium term. So that was kind of the broad strokes of the article. If anyone has any thoughts or comments on it, I think it was pretty reasonable in its assessment and its conclusions. But if you guys have any thoughts or objections or whatever you want to say. Go ahead.
No, not really. I mean, trying to convince Trump with Trump things, I guess.
Yeah, I will say that the Russians seem to know how to talk to Trump in certain ways. They seem to have channels to Trump that other countries don't, things like that. So, I mean, this seems to be their best shot at some kind of plan. So we'll see how it shakes out. Another development that I didn't cover in the main news because it's just talk and I don't like to cover that in the main news. Russia said they were ready basically for higher level negotiations or at least direct negotiations with Ukraine. As we know, recently they've been claiming that they've liberated the Kursk region. However, Erlend, maybe I can ask you, as far as I understand, that's basically not true. Like there is geolocated data that shows Ukrainian forces are still active, at least on some small level in the Kursk region, as well as in the Belgorod region. So this idea that the Russians have completely expelled the Ukrainians, it's just kind of one of those things. And I think they've claimed this multiple times at this point. But this week they said, finally, we've expelled all the Ukrainian invaders from Kursk and blah blah blah. But go ahead.
Not only that, Gerasimov did something that is super interesting because he basically thanked the North Koreans for being fundamental in helping the Russians expelling Ukraine from what he called an invasion into Russia, which was, of course, kind of big news that Gerasimov said this, I would say, because they've claimed they denied everything that had to do with North Koreans in fighting in this war.
This is the first official confirmation from the Russians that the North Koreans have been militarily involved. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and also like they were very careful about mentioning whatever was happening in Kursk as invasion into Russia. They would say this is like terrorists inside our country or security problems. But so typical Russian communication, Gerasimov here being very frank compared to what we've seen from the Russian authorities before, I would say. That's the vigil, by the way, where he's saying this
something. You got Andrea Lucidi, the Italian propagandist. He's been denying all the time until yesterday that there were any North Koreans fighting for Russia. And then Gerasimov came into the picture and denied that himself. It's quite surprising.
Yeah, it's very surprising the way he's doing it, but there was framing it as like the framework of security cooperation with North Korea has developed. It's very Russian anyways.
Yeah. They laid all the official groundwork for this. They did all the state visits and shook all the hands and visited the palace of the North Koreans and all that and made declarations and signed treaties.
I mean, it's a lot more honest and I would say makes a lot more sense than anything from their propaganda. Like Gerasimov is here just doing what any military leader would do in communicating the actual relationship with North Korea that they have, which is true, right? Like they did everything, all those diplomatic steps and handshakes, and we know that the Russians have unfortunately transferred technology to the North Koreans as well, in exchange for probably munitions and these people.
Like we definitely have proof that the North Koreans have sent millions of shells to Russia. We have proof of their soldiers fighting. Like we have obvious footage of that. We have photographs of like them with Russian units. We have possible evidence this week, which I don't have an article for, but I remember the president mentioned of Ukraine that there's possibly a North Korean missile fired, and they're going to take a closer look at it and see. And of course, also North Korean artillery pieces have been sent to Ukraine to fight, or sorry, to Kursk. That's, like you said, it's there's obvious proof of all this stuff. But I did want to ask you about the actual liberation of Kursk, because you're more on the GEO side of things than me. Like, we covered, I think, a few weeks ago, like, obviously the main operation of Kursk is over. Like, there was collapse might be a strong word, but there was a strategic withdrawal from Kursk by the Ukrainians after the position became sort of untenable. They couldn't get supplies to the troops on the main roads. But as far as I understand, the data I've seen from the people I am aware of, there are still some activities going on by the Ukrainians on the Kursk side of the border. And for Russia to say like it's completely 100% cleared and that Kursk is like now totally clear is incorrect. So I don't know if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, but for all like in purposes, military purposes, they've succeeded in expelling the Ukrainians, I would say, in the sense that yes, there are geolocated footage of Ukraine still fighting in some of these areas, but I would say that's in the border areas, right? They don't have any towns, villages under control anymore. So, I mean, it's not that wrongful to claim that they've successfully expelled Ukraine here.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely more plugged into that side of things than me. So,
I mean,
but yeah,
it
that's
is
something
true.
that
Like, you're right. Like, they didn't expel them out of all of the border areas, etc. But I'm just saying, it's the military operation inside Kursk is, by and large, over from the Ukrainian side.
I would definitely agree with that. The main thrust of the operation is over. What is happening now appears to be just like the Ukrainians like making sure that it costs to take territory if they're able to do that, right? Which makes sense.
It's tactically not, that they're keeping tactical positions, basically.
Right.
They're not, it wouldn't make sense to retreat to the border again, because some of these positions that they have are better than staying at the border. So that's basically why they're still there, I think.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So that's pretty much that piece of news. And then I did want to talk to you, Erlend, while we're talking a little bit about just the UK's peacekeeper talk this week. Back in February, all these headlines from all these countries, peacekeeping force, we're going to keep peacekeepers on the border, and like Erlend being a military mind of decent quality took one look at that and said, well, I see a gigantic border here. It's going to take 100,000 soldiers. That means we're going to have to rotate them. So that means you're going to have to triple that. So 300,000 soldiers. We don't have 300,000 soldiers. And even if we did, putting 100,000 soldiers in Ukraine means people are going to die. Like there's going to be accidents. Like we saw recently, there were 4 US soldiers who tragically died in Lithuania. Like you have accidents like that happening just normally. This is a place where there's landmines and drones and missiles. And like, I mean, you're going to have accidents and, quote unquote escalation if that's what they're afraid of. So this is pretty patently obvious to Erlend. He wrote an article about it that I think was pretty straightforward. And it's just so crazy to me that all these public promises were made back then, and no one seems to have informed the people who are making those promises of what the actual plan would entail in terms of what capabilities and costs it would require. And now they're speaking a little bit more reasonably, I would say, which we can talk about next. But I think first, like Erlend, I think is now you're a very humble man and you would never do this, but I'm giving you the opportunity to gloat a bit, to say you were right, and then just talk about maybe some of these comments that had been made this week.
Yeah, so when I wrote that article, one of the reasons why I did it was to kind of make people, or I wanted to make people aware that Ukraine, of course, was demanding or saying we need this and this and this for a peacekeeping force to be actually something that we can trust as a security guarantee, which I absolutely agree on. Like, they want the tripwire force because they don't feel like 15,000 soldiers being deployed somewhere in Western Ukraine doing some training missions is going to be any security guarantee for them at all. Like, from what I've understood, they perceive that as a positive thing, but they don't perceive it as a security guarantee. Of course, they would like it still. So I just had to look at the whole kind of peacekeeping mission within what Ukraine said is the minimum necessary, and that would be a tripwire force. So a force that is deployed along the front lines, either mixed with Ukrainians, or maybe deployed together with Ukrainians in some fashion, right? Working independently or integrated into their brigade systems. Because that would basically mean if Russia crossed the border, or the new not the border, but the front lines, frozen front lines at any point in time, that would immediately put the security forces that Europe would contribute to Ukraine in war with Russia. So that would force us to react, which of course is what Ukraine wants, because that would feel a lot more secure than just having some guys deployed in Western Ukraine that can easily just leave the country if something happens, right? And I just see it as completely impossible. Like, we don't have the forces to do it, and also, or mainly, I don't think any country in Europe are going to be willing to do it, because what has happened now probably is that the politicians have given a mission to the military to evaluate what they can do, and they've come back and said, yeah, we can do this and this and that, and these are the security implications. Like, these are the risks, and they've probably said, we're gonna lose people there, people are gonna die, and now they're saying, we're not so interested in doing that.
Daniela, go ahead.
Hello, hi to everyone. Good evening. I would like to just add something to what Erlend said, and I totally share most of the discussion that Erlend brilliantly detailed, but I also want to warn everyone about the article on Politico, which essentially contains nothing than misleading title, because Luke Pollard, for who doesn't know very well, is a very good politician in UK, and has been a very good spokesman for the Minister of Defense. He have been able to dodge and also reply to very harsh question from Times, from BBC and many other news outlets. So his reply, and is available also the full episodes on Times Radio on YouTube, he is not saying that Britain is not going to do that. But what he's trying to do is trying to not essentially do the same mistake that, for example, the Trump administration have done with the Russian during negotiation. Because at the moment, it's of course, for what Erlend has said, there is still the idea that for this mission, in case to be successful, then there is the need of a backstop from the US. And so what UK is trying to do is trying to pressure as much as possible the White House and Trump to try to sponsor these, essentially, to make it less impossible, let's say. So the way on how he replied essentially is not saying it's not going to happen in any case, even if Trump is not going to do this, but is trying to leverage on that point. So that's a political and a negotiation tactics on how he replied to that. Now, on the specific regards on what will happen and the technicality, I totally agree with Erlend. I don't like this idea of peacekeeping mission, and also because I don't think that there will be any peace to be held. And also because this type of mission will pose a very high risk with a very low capability of gaining anything, and we will not have the escalation ladder on our side. Instead, we'll still on the Russian side, which can decide at any point to use a heavy weapon on our troops. That's my point, because Politico has been very much distorting reality since this war started. Has produced very good pieces, but a lot of doubtful interpretation of reality. And I have seen many press conference with Luke Pollard, and he is amazing in his job. And his reply was very much political, to try to evade more question about the topic, because there are negotiations around this with the White House for sure, and also in Europe.
Yes, and I totally agree with your point on this specific comment, but you and me know both that unless the US will do some sort of backstop or supply Europe with additional weaponry, especially munitions for our air forces, there is basically no way we would be able to pose a real true security guarantee in Ukraine. So I would say Politico is not, they're not hitting the nail, but the reality is that without the US, we're not able to pose a big enough threat to Russia inside Ukraine, in my opinion. So it's a very big issue, in my opinion, that we're not realistic about this stuff. I'm happy that there are talks about deploying troops to Ukraine, because I truly think we should do it as soon as possible, but not as a peacekeeping mission, but as a signal towards Ukraine that we are going to stand there with them, and also because we really need to train more Ukrainians, and I think that more Ukrainians would want to sign up for the military if we place a fairly large contingent somewhere in Western Ukraine, basically only for training purposes, but also as a morale boost. And I know that you agree with me on this point, but and I've talked to some people that have been on the meeting in Paris, for instance, that was only the military people that were having some preliminary talks after one of those famous Macron meetings. And they said we are really like in the very, very early stages of just finding out the possibilities of what we can do militarily. That there is no like real mission on the table right now.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that the main point is that the politicians do not have the understand, not because they are stupid, but they then don't have the information and the understanding of what type of capability at the moment all military in Europe have for a purely land-based operation in Ukraine. Because if you think about the UK now is deploying a very large mission with the 2025 carrier strike group. This has been a very gigantic effort for the Royal Navy after many years, and for now it's been successful, but this is just a tiny thing if you compare to the amount of resources, logistic, and all the infrastructure that needs to go in a large operation in Ukraine. So I think even this article from Politico is just speculative. This is my point is all through the article, not the entire environment, which I 100% agree with what you say.
My point is that whatever Europe would be able to put on the ground in Ukraine would be purely symbolic. And I think that is actually going to be increasing the risk that we will have a larger conflict somewhere else in Europe where involving Russia. I think that it's going to be, the Russians are just going to look at it and say like, that's ridiculous, and we know that it's not going to actually pose a significant security guarantee for Ukraine. Let them have that puny thing there in Lviv or wherever it's going to be. This is actually, to our benefit to have these guys there. So that's my view on these kind of talks. On the other hand, if we just deploy them now, I think it's completely the opposite effect. I think it would scare the Russians a little bit, and also it would boost Ukraine's morale significantly. So I think the pretext for the whole deploying soldiers to Ukraine is the wrong one. And I'm also almost 100% sure that it's never going to happen in a peacekeeping framework. We just don't have the troops, and we don't have the munitions for our Air Force to pose a significant threat to the Russians.
I think you make a really good point, Erlend, that like it's been counterproductive to conflate the idea of boots on the ground with like a security guarantee or a peacekeeping force. Like that has been counterproductive. I think in the past, when we were dealing with stuff involving helping Ukraine, we had this like weird, we were taking like steps and steps. It was like, well, can we send them tanks? Are we allowed to? Oh, someone sent them tanks. Now everyone can, it's like sort of that kind of game. And I think that it was much better served when this idea of sending Western troops to Ukraine was just one of those things versus this like big peacekeeping mission. Because as you said, like there are real reasons we should probably send a force to Ukraine. I think the two main reasons are, number one, Europe does have a huge refugee population of Ukrainians who were like forced out of the country. And to have just an area of Ukraine that says, it's under protection. Like we're going to not let missiles land here. That could really be a big deal for countries like Poland or other countries that have proposed this, Romania, that, like we could send in some kind of peacekeeping force under the UN to build some kind of a protective zone. The other obvious reasoning would be what you said, like training. There's good reasons to do it there. The issue is neither of those are security guarantees, right? Those are more just like, one is sort of a humanitarian gesture, maybe an economic gesture. The other one is more of like a, helpful gesture to their military, but not a security guarantee for Ukraine. So that leaves us to what are security guarantees for Ukraine? That's kind of the crux of the matter, right? That's what the president of Ukraine is always talking about, that like these peace negotiations are all good, but there's no security guarantee. And the US isn't offering real security guarantees. And that's why we're seeing all of this like shuffling around, right? So I think there's like four paths that I can think of, Erlend, and you can maybe add or subtract whatever you want. The first, from highest to lowest, Ukraine joins NATO. That would be the highest level of security guarantee for Ukraine. I think that's what most Ukrainians would want in a perfect world. The second highest would be Ukraine gets like Israel treatment. And this is something Zelenskyy has explicitly called it. But I think the idea in general is like, it gets special guarantees from a country like the US that we've got their back, something like that, right? And then the third model would be an EU guarantee of some kind. You've already outlined all the problems with that, but at the end of the day, if Europe really gets its act together and can figure out in the next year or two how to guarantee Ukrainian security meaningfully, that's an option, right? And then the fourth is like just heavily funding the Ukrainian military to protect themselves. Something like Israel treatment light, right? There's no real security guarantees for Ukraine, but they at least give the Ukrainian military enough support that they're able to porcupine their way out of fighting Russia again, right? So those are like the four options. Obviously, the fourth is like the least tolerable for Ukraine, but might work maybe as a security guarantee. So I don't know. What do you think about all that, Erlend? Like, are those the options on the table here? That seems to be the crux of the matter.
Yeah, and I think that the most probable one, unfortunately, is the fourth, that Europe is going to try and increase production and capabilities to prop up the Ukrainian military as much as possible, so that Russia will feel basically scared of Ukraine. But the problem here is how much time is that going to take? I would say it would take maybe 5 to 10 years. It's not within the time frame that we are looking at when it comes to when is Russia likely going to attack again if there is any sort of ceasefire. And honestly, because of what has happened the last 3 months since Trump took office, I think that any sort of ceasefire in the nearest future the probability of that happening has significantly been reduced. Also because Ukraine has, to a certain degree, been able to strengthen their military. And at least my perception is that even though people in Ukraine might not be very content at all with any of the situation, they are definitely very nervous about the international security, that is the state of the international security and geopolitics in general. But the morale has in some way been increased in the sense that there seems to be more people that want to continue to fight at any cost as a reaction to some of what has happened, and one of them being the famous Oval Office incident, I think. So I just honestly don't see any ceasefire possibilities within the next couple of years.
I think we both share the opinion that the ceasefire itself, while it's important, like I don't know if I would necessarily agree that we all want a ceasefire. Like I would rather have Ukraine reclaim their territory and get properly armed and all that. Like, but at the end of the day, like if a ceasefire happens, let's say it's a thing and it's a reality now, but that doesn't really change the fact that Ukraine needs a security guarantee, right? Like the ceasefire is a piece of paper. As you said, the Russians have every incentive to continue pursuing their goals, and their military is going to be stronger than Europe until Europe really changes course here. So Ukraine still stands as the main obstacle to their goals. I'll put it that way. And then like Ukraine still needs a security guarantee, even with a ceasefire in place. That's kind of the bottom line here is what I'm getting at. And so the minute the ceasefire is signed, we now move to the real question. Okay, how do we enforce that ceasefire? What was the security guarantee mechanism for Ukraine? So the ceasefire is, I would argue, like separate to the security guarantee, which is the real issue. If we had a security guarantee tomorrow for Ukraine, the ceasefire would probably be more possible, right? I think that's like the ceasefire is the center of gravity here. The security guarantee is the center of gravity here. Everything else is kind of peripheral to it, I think.
Yeah, the problem is that Europe is not able to or willing to spend what is needed to increase production capabilities and also various technological abilities fast enough. So Ukraine will not have any security guarantees from Europe that they will perceive as enough, I think. And when we look at what the US is saying and communicating about their intentions, it certainly doesn't seem like they are willing to either supply weaponry that would be, for instance, like Zelenskyy said, give me 1,000 Tomahawks. That's going to be something that we will appreciate as a big step towards security guarantees. And the US said, absolutely not, right? So if we don't see any signs of the US being willing to completely change their intentions here, it's going to be very, very hard for Ukraine to accept any sort of ceasefire with what Europe has pledged to Ukraine right now, and also what Europe is capable of. And Ukraine is also very well aware of the European military capabilities. And I don't want to say that our militaries are less strong than Russia's. That's not what I'm trying to say here. It's just we're not able to deploy to Ukraine what would be strong enough for Ukraine to accept as a security guarantee over time. Like we could probably mass significant forces in a crisis or war situation, which would be more than enough. But we're talking about a mission that would last maybe 5-10 years here, and that's not something we are able to deploy right now.
I think obviously like Europe's population, military potential, industrial power, economic power, like all of that is much, much higher than Russia. But Russia is on full war footing. They've got the people, they've got the experience. If the conflict in Ukraine is frozen right now, I don't see any reason why they would stop pursuing their goals in other regions, right? And kind of strengthening their position. And like the problem kind of doesn't go away. But I mean, you're well aware of all of this. I think we've talked about it at length in the past. So, but yeah, I think I've done my best, I think, to try to like illustrate where we're kind of at diplomatically. I think the situation is still very fraught. I think, as Erlend kind of illustrated, the main issue right now is that Europe needs to kind of build an independent security capacity. That's the real bottom line here. Any like final thoughts before we move on to the final couple topics here, Erlend?
Yeah, I mean, there are good signs from several countries in Europe that we're significantly going to increase our military capabilities, right? The biggest news, of course, the last few months came from Germany, but we still have countries like France, Italy, Spain that are completely unwilling to invest anything close to what is necessary. The Italians are the worst example, of course, and it's that it disturbs a train of thought just to think about it. Like it's incredibly frustrating to see the whole Rearm Europe package being blocked by countries that are just not doing anything for the security of Europe. But it's just it doesn't look very good right now, unfortunately. But there are some positive signs, especially Germany and the Scandinavian countries, I guess.
And I don't want to tell this, but Spain just committed to reach the 2%, I think, within this year. And Italy is still bragging about that. So it's even worse.
Italy is bragging about what?
Arriving to even the 2%.
Well, they won't reach 2%.
Exactly. I mean, because Spain had the highest growth in all the Europe, in most of the European countries, I think in all Europe, they decided to commit more resources, so they will reach 2% soon. At least the government committed now. Instead, in Italy, from what I understood, they're still trying to rearrange to convince people that they are spending more, but it's not. So it's much, much worse than what you depicted. It's probably the least one.
Yeah, I agree with you, Daniela. I'm also Italian and I read Italian media. And I believe it was like 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago that Giorgia Meloni was bragging about, perhaps we are going to reach the 2% for NATO. And most of the people are against that, to be honest, because they have no clue about the big danger from the East and from the West, to be honest. So now it's really frustrating. And I'm Italian and live in Norway, where the perception of reality is the opposite. And I'm really glad that I'm living here, even if we got a border with Russia. But I was in Italy 2 weeks ago, and it's unbelievable to see and to hear how different people think there. And a big issue is about the media. The media in Italy are so infiltrated by Russian propaganda at any level, which is terrible. Really, I would like to see more counteraction from European Union to counter Russian propaganda in our territories. That should be a priority, together with rearming.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I think U.S. just shut down BOA and stuff. I did want to ask you guys, there's a couple Italians here, that Meloni had an extended meeting with Zelenskyy recently. Normally I don't cover that stuff, but I am curious, anything in the Italian media about like what happened in the meeting or anything significant come from that?
If I if I can start about that, I don't really read much about Italian media because there are two parties on both sides, either too much pro Meloni or too much against Meloni. So Meloni, she says that is really pro Ukraine, pro NATO. I don't really trust her, and the other parties in her government, which are Lega Nord, is totally pro Russia. So you cannot trust them. Salvini is the guy who was on the Red Square with the Putin T-shirt many years ago. The other party is the old Berlusconi party. They were also very close to Putin. I don't know. Meloni, she's got a decent rhetoric for being pro-Ukraine, but I don't really trust her. On the other side, you got a few parliament representative from the left-hand side who are really good, trustworthy people supporting Ukraine. Like, I don't know if I can say the name, but there is a lady she's the deputy head of European Parliament from Democratic Parliament, and she is very good pro-Ukraine politician, Pina Picciotto, but on the left-hand side, you got a lot of people who still go after the Russian propaganda about against NATO, against USA, and no, Italian public opinion is really split and very badly informed. Media and politics in Italy are really doing a bad work about the invasion of Ukraine. And I believe that both Erlend and Daniela would agree with me.
Yeah, unfortunately, the general media picture is very sad, but I would say that there are some very, very good journalists as well that are among the best reporters, international reporters that go to Ukraine regularly. The problem is that they're drowning in what I would say is a very tabloid format, where sensationalism and drama is more appreciated than very good information and good accurate reporting and analysis. Unfortunately, like you see, if you look at debates in Italy, they tend to favor inviting people that shout and scream a lot and not so much people that are interesting, which is very sad.
Sorry, just to add something on the starting of this conversation, and add more depression. Spain at the beginning of this year planned to reach to 2% in 2029. Now they plan to do this within 2025. So this is to give you the perspective of a government that is able to change mind and understand priorities. And of course also use more money at its disposal. As I said, economy in Spain is growing very well. So they say, why not? There is a threat, there is a need, there is the possibility, let's do it. Italy, which would be one of the most interested in this area, since Italy developed a lot of system. One of these is SAMT, completely decided to become like a sideshow for European rearmament and defense programs. And on a more sweet side note, looks like that UK and Starmer is trying to sign this agreement between Europe and UK in order to have a deep collaboration with the EU. So things are moving, I think, in a good direction on this part. Also because a months ago, UK and BDA essentially entered into the interceptor program, which was only hosted by Italy and France. And I think the idea is to move some production of Aster 30 and 15, which are also useful for UK Navy in UK in order to increase the production. But this is still a long way to go, but show a pattern. The only problem is the speed on how these things happen. It should occur faster. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think they're like it's kind of a big background thing going on, but basically like the EU and the UK have sat down for some trade negotiations, and like the gist of it is like the EU is doing a bunch of rearming programs right now, and most of that money is going to favor EU countries, and the UK is trying to say like, look, can we get in on a little bit of that? We can make some systems for you cheaper that are good. And the UK, I think, is maybe willing to look at fishing rights over that. That's always been a big contention with the EU and all that. And then there's also man, I lost my train of thought. But there's another issue that, the Trump trade war. They're like, maybe now that things have gotten kind of crazy with the US, it's better to have an agreement between each other, right? So seems like there's positive developments on that. I think obviously it'd be a good thing for the EU and the UK to integrate more on defense and on trade. So yeah, it's like good stuff. Erlend, you are of course a proud Norwegian, and wanted to bring up that NASAMS achieved a record apparently this week that they shot down 11 cruise missiles in 2 minutes with NASAMS. So good on them. Yeah, good on Raytheon in Norway. Good job, guys. And then I think my last bit for this.
Hey, we're Raytheon.
Sorry, I don't know. All right, yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't have tainted your beautiful Norwegian compliment with.
I'm offended, and I'm not even Norwegian.
Okay. Last item is just some things Donald Trump has said, because why not? So of course there was the famous Vladimir stop. Some good memes came out of that. Basically, Russia, the strategic forces launched a missile into Sumy and killed a bunch of people. It was really terrible. And they actually, as far as I know, Putin actually acknowledged that it was like I don't know, that they hit civilians or something in a speech. But anyway, the point is, it was a big attack. It was really bad. And as a result, Trump put out like an angry Truth Social post, and it said like, Vladimir, stop. And of course, I think a lot of people kind of made fun of it as like very impotent. The other issue is he said, tapping me along. I don't know if I've ever heard that phrase. I think the more common phrase is stringing me along, but that seemed to be the context of what he was saying. In his Truth Social post, he went on kind of a rant about his typical rant, I would say, about how this all is kind of like Biden and Obama's fault. They kind of set all the stage for this. They didn't stop Putin and so forth. And then, like, why is it now all on him to do all this? And Putin's kind of his friend. And but then at the end, he basically said, I don't know, man. Seems like Putin might just be tapping me along. And I don't know. I personally would be of the opinion that I think like there's a few things at play here. I think that genuinely Trump is probably impatient. He wants some kind of a PR victory. He wants his Nobel Peace Prize, and he is sick of kind of the Russians feeling like they're in a better position and not really being sincere about what they want to make real, give Trump what he wants. So that's going on. The other thing that's going on is he was in Europe. He was at the funeral of the Pope. And I don't know, it just seems like he was maybe in a good mood. A bunch of world leaders he ran into, talked to him for a while. There's a bunch of gold everywhere. Everyone's saying he's important. Maybe he felt good. And I think like he heard through osmosis, maybe he collected some ideas about what's going on in Europe and with Ukraine. And I'm hoping that maybe sticks with him. I don't know. A bunch of crazy people back home will probably disabuse him of those sane notions shortly, forthwith. And then, so I think those are probably the two main like forces at work in this man's mind. But I don't know. So it still seems like there's no real plan coming from the White House about how to actually expedite these negotiations and get serious. There are some movements from lower levels of the U.S. Republicans. So Newt Gingrich and I think Senator Chuck Grassley have started some legislation to start putting more serious sanctions on Russia. We're not seeing really serious movement yet against Russia from the U.S., but there's, I would say, increasing evidence that there's a faction of the Republicans that are getting louder because they're not seeing progress on this issue. So not like the best. I'm not going to try to sell this as like amazing news, but it's like sort of, decent news, I guess. So I think that's my summary. Go ahead, Erlend.
I guess so. It seems to me like there are a bunch of Americans realizing that the US can't just dictate everything that happens around in the world without actually providing some hard force. The US can definitely do more or less what they want with any country militarily, but unless they're willing to do that, it seems like the world is just gonna go along its own path. And it seems like some people in the US thought that wasn't the case, and now they're realizing the world is a little bit more complicated than how it is. I remember back when Trump was just instated as in his second term, some Americans that I talk to often said, like, Ukraine is so fucked right now. There's going to be forced settlement, and it's going to happen very fast. And there's 100% guarantee this is going to happen. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, there are some other, things to consider here than the US. And they were like, no, this is just how it's going to be because Trump is a madman, and Ukraine doesn't have a chance without the US. And yeah, I think the world is a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, and ironically, I think the US's biggest instrument of influence was its control over the economic system, and that control was contingent on it being a sane actor that follows, coherent rules, and that those rules apply more or less equally to everyone. Obviously, there's shady dealings going on in the global economy. I'm not here to suggest that there aren't, but you get the idea. That's how the system's supposed to run, ideally. And he threw a giant wrench in that and really undermined a lot of the economic influence, at least in the short term, possibly in the long term. We'll see. And so it's one of the largest in soft influences the U.S. now had over the world is kind of been thrown into question. And yeah, definitely to stress, like, the sanctions have really done a number on Russia and Iran over the last decade. Like, those countries have really been crippled by those sanctions. So having the U.S. lose that instrument would be pretty serious. And we're right now looking down that path unless we really smarten up about U.S. economic policy over here anyway.
Yep. Hey, I want to leave final thoughts to Alex, but before that, I just want to announce that we're gonna have a very cool stream next Sunday because some people from Come Back Alive are gonna join us and talk about their drone fall program. So I recommend everyone to tune in next Sunday. And I guess if Alex has any final thoughts, since you had your fantastic interview, I think you can close out with that.
Thank you for that, Erlend. No, I don't have anything specific to end our streaming tonight, but I really believe that the final 4 years of the interview with Petro gave hope, because when I'm analyzing the information from Mariupol, Donetsk, Makivka, and the occupied territories in Donetsk, very often I feel sadness, and sometimes I really feel that, my God, are we going to see those territories free again? But the final part of the interview by Petro tonight they really give hope, because you see that people from those territories, and by the way, for those who do not know, Petro is displaced and is living in Dnipro, so he is living under more or less constantly bombing. He's giving hope because they truly believe that they will see freedom again soon, not in a faraway future, but he said 2026 we will work with probably Ukrainian boots on the ground to free Mariupol. So that's why we need to support, and by we I mean Europe, first of all, and hopefully US again. And
Absolutely.
I believe that everybody here in Tochnyi is very aligned on that.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. So thank you, Alex, for an excellent interview. Hopefully you'll be back next week for, as Erlend said, our Comeback Alive interview. Wasn't sure if I was allowed to plug that, if everything was confirmed. I'm going to assume it is now because Erlend confirmed it. So yeah, let's do it, man. I'm real excited for it. This is going to be a great interview. Comeback Alive. Anything else you want to say about it?
Well, just, bring people and good questions, because I think what they are doing, their model, is something we should learn from, because it's in a way a part of the future of security infrastructure.
Absolutely. Really excited for this interview. Looking forward to it. Hopefully you guys are too in chat. And yeah, spread the word. As Erlend said, we're looking forward to it, and very, very happy that Comeback Alive agreed to do it. Cool. Alex, do you have any other, like, someone's asking, you have like social media, anything you want to let people know where they can hear more about you?
Well, of course, there is my own X account, which is forlex5, and also on Blue Sky. Tochnyi, who retweets my content very often, and also those channels that we shared in the live description tonight. And anyway, you can reach out to me, perhaps on X, so I can share more information.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks, of course, everyone, for tuning in this week. We really appreciate it. Thanks to our panel. Special thanks to Alex for doing a great interview. And yeah, we appreciate everyone. Please do hit the like and subscribe button for all future updates to Tochnyi. Check out our Twitter, Blue Sky. Check out our website, tochnyi.info. There's a lot of great articles there and all sorts of other stuff, interactive maps, cool things. And always feel welcome to provide your feedback or questions. We're happy to get more information about what you guys want to know about. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see everyone next week, same time, 2100 Kyiv time on Sunday. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.